Okay, Mrs. Saga, keeping it real. It's your host, Banu. I have a special guest, and I'm really excited about this episode because it's definitely been an interest of mine and really wanted to get someone who has experience, who's written some books, who's well adverse in this area. And you're probably wondering what I'm talking about. So let me introduce our guest today. SunBôw TrueBrother is an author, an international speaker, and a shamanic practitioner who traveled for 4 decades in 20 countries on 4 continents, learning ancestral wisdom and ceremonial ways with numerous indigenous elders from dozens of nations from North to South America and to Australia. Paranormal encounters and experiences have been part of his training, as well as karmic cleansing. Following spiritual guidance, including from non human intelligence, SunBôw wrote the Sasquatch Message to Humanity trilogy, with the third book being an international collaboration of co authors and the Encyclopedia of All Things Sasquatch, and extensive documented research. His last series, Contemporary Shamanic Journeys, is an autobiographical account of the teachings he has received throughout his life. With 3 volumes published, his books are listed on his website, offering also 1,000 information posts. And we will be sharing his social handles on the show notes. But those who are quite curious, it's sasquatch.com. That's SCENIC, Sasquatch, SASQATCH.com. That's an intro. SunBôw, welcome to Mississauga, Keeping It Real.
Thank you, Banu. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Just before we started the podcast, I was just letting you know how I was able to connect with you. And just for our listeners to sort of know how the connection occurred, this summer, I was in Nelson, BC, met a few people down there. And, every time I go to BC or Alberta, people always are talking about Sasquatch. So at this little office that I was there, this lady had mentioned, well, I know someone who has lots of experience in this area. And I was like, no way. So, and this is how SunBôw sort of is here today. So, SunBôw, we've just met. And I'm really excited about this episode. So, let's start from the beginning, SunBôw. Um, where are you originally from, SunBôw?
I was born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, and but I've traveled from a young age. I started at 16, traveling around North America, and it went on for 40 some years of traveling around, which became my pretty much my way of life, my school, my spiritual path, going around looking for wisdom, for knowledge, and meeting elders and wise teachers who gave me the guidance and the keys necessary to advance on this path. That's pretty much my background. I started having paranormal encounters, we can say, before I was 18, so that's over 40 years ago. It started with several kinds of experiences and encounters, but namely with, what we learn in shamanism is to relate and communicate with the other dimensions, like the spirit world, and interdimensional beings, like what we call the extraterrestrials or star people. and other non-human intelligence like the Sasquatch. Sasquatch are commonly called by a series of names, and basically uh, like Bigfoot is most famous. But there's also names in all ancient tribes, ancient cultures have stories about the hairy humanoids. So it started for me in 81 on my first close encounter that launched me on a quest to find answers. And the experiences came before the teachings. So I had to look for the explanations and the teachings from wise ones and people who know about those topics, and they are very rare, very hard to find, and the most authentic teachings and knowledge about such topics, non-human intelligence, I found in indigenous cultures, shamanic cultures that known and taught about those beings since ancient days. And also, many of those cultures have kept contact and communication with such beings through their ceremonies and through their in their culture. So that's where I found, and that's what I recommend for people who seek to learn about Sasquatch. It's go to the cultures who have had generations of interaction and knowledge about them. And you will find out that those indigenous cultures uh, very often are still in contact. Some among them are still in contact with those beings. So that's the best place to start. The other next best place is experiencers, people who have had encounters. It doesn't mean everyone who had an encounter is necessarily very knowledgeable or doesn't necessarily understand all the that's involved, all that's implied in these encounters. So it can take years of research to start understanding and knowing what's really going on with those beings or those encounters some may have. So there are different ways to approach and to learn about Sasquatch. And what we will learn with the people who have had encounters, it's that we have to be in a very good spirit, a very good intention, pure heart, peaceful intention, come with respect in a friendly manner, and like we would approach some wise elder to learn. So if we come with this attitude, this approach, there's experience has shown that it's the most successful in establishing contact and developing communication. By now, have heard of well over 500 people who have had encounters with Sasquatch. Um, about 400 have shared their accounts on my website. And what we see is exactly what I just said: is if we come to those beings in peace, with respect, with love, with no fear, with no weapons, no guns, well, there's a much better chance that we will establish contact. If you look at all those so-called experts who run around with infrared goggles and uh, trail cams and guns and try to track Sasquatch. Well, they can go on and on for seasons on TV, some series without finding anything because no Sasquatch would be interested in meeting the people with such an approach.
That
Uh,
makes total sense. Yes, you're absolutely right. Because I know on YouTube, SunBôw, that there's a lot of videos on it's like an episode one, episode two, and then they go on the hunt looking for the Sasquatch, and they got the infrared cameras, the lights, and all that showboating stuff. But just listening to what you just said, it's the complete opposite. Where if you come with love, peace, respect, and I think what you said very importantly is they being senior, like showing them compassion and wisdom.
yeah, yeah, because they to know the Sasquatch the best way beyond people who know them is directly learning from the Sasquatch. They know one better than them can tell us who they are. And that's a long process. It's not a weekend hobby that people go out and will run into a Sasquatch the first time, and it's not that easy. It takes, first of all, it takes some sincere dedication. It's not given to everyone. If you look in the tribes and the legend and the stories of everywhere, most often people would stay away from the Sasquatch or from the areas they were known to be. And mainly the medicine people, the shamans, would serve as interprets or ambassadors. The people who had sufficient spiritual training to communicate and to just to basically to deal with the energy of such powerful beings. Because once you start hearing and knowing about them, uh, best way through direct encounters, you realize that there's no big apes out there. There's people who look for a big ape will never find one, and it's not a primitive hominin that or relict hominin or unknown primate. What we're dealing with here. And if we look at all the ancient tribes, what they say, well, those who have the best knowledge about those beings, that is sadly too often discarded by modern researchers, is magical or spirit being. It's got a very strong psychic abilities. It's got paranormal abilities, what we can say interdimensional abilities. So you hear over and over and over in hundreds and thousands of accounts those same phenomena that Sasquatch appears out of the blue, disappears, can vanish like a cloud, can glide across a forest, can walk through walls, can appear in a translucid, holographic type of form. It can appear as a shadow. It can shapeshift, and on and on and on. When we start looking at what the ancestral knowledge teaches us, we start to get the picture. Because we have to say that among the modern Sasquatchery, as I call the modern mainstream Sasquatch Bigfoot research, we have to know that there's a lot of disinformation and intentional misleading for several reasons. Because one of them is that several secret agencies of major powers like the CIA, the KGB, the MI6, and so on, were have been closely monitoring, if not, when not directly involved into the research on the hairy humanoids, whether the Yeti in the Himalayas or the Sasquatch, Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest and elsewhere. Um, that why secret agencies are involved covertly while openly denying any form of interest or that even those beings might exist, despite so many proof gathered for over a century by now. So we might people ask, "Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence?" Well, it's quite easy if you trace back the evidence. Since and we can go back centuries because in 5,000 years of literature, we can notice that when we dig deep enough, we can notice that there's been hairy humanoids and human literature since the beginning, in China, in India, in the Middle East, in the antiquity in Europe, in the Middle Age. There's always been stories of hairy humanoids. That I'm just addressing here the written literature, but if we talk about oral tradition, it multiplies by many times that just about every ancient culture has stories about those beings. Some more closely, some more remotely, but the most ancient culture had knowledge of the existence of those beings.
It's interesting that you say that, Sunbao. I was just going to say something, and you said it like, world traditions. You mentioned Europe, China, even in India. There's a podcaster that I follow in India, Biceps and Beers, Ranveer show. And he had a retired army vet, and who his employment was in the Himalayas, a certain part of the Himalayas. And long story short, his story was that there was an encounter that he had with a Yeti. And like you said, there's different names for them. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti. And so he was sharing his story. And this is in the winter, and they can see the footprints. They were just huge. And I think you've already answered the question in your statement that, traditions around the world have alluded to some type of humanoid, hairy being. When you were mentioning that, I'm a Hindu myself. One of our many gods, one of them being Hanumanji, he's
Yeah,
also an ape,
yeah,
and he lives between interdimensional worlds. He's there and he's here. And I'm just fascinated. You had mentioned earlier in your journey that you were always intrigued and wanted to find wisdom through the elders, and through shamanism, and you said spirituality was something that was also at the forefront. Did you ever realize that this is the path that you would be taking?
well, yeah, it was a choice because, well, when I before I turned 17, actually, when I was 16, still, I left on my first journey around North America, and it very soon, became a spiritual pilgrimage. I wondered, what am I doing on this planet, wandering around, and I decided I'm going to find out. And I went seeking for answers and for guidance. And the more I sought, the more I found, the more I was guided to many spiritual teachings from, including Indigenous Elders, but as well including other traditions like the Vedas, for instance, that I studied.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, I studied the Vedas from a young age, and even Sanskrit. I could read and write it at some point.
Wow.
Well, I mentioned Hanuman in my books. If you read them,
Oh, is that right? Okay. Yes,
oh,
absolutely.
okay, I tell a story about the Ram Setu.
That's right. That's right. I
And
visited that area in India. That's right.
oh, nice. That's amazing. Yeah, and so it's all related. If we look at the similar traditions and other cultures, like in China, Sun Wukong, it's another ape god, or we can say actually the Vanara of Hanuman, which means, from my understanding of Sanskrit, it means the forest man, uh,
Mm.
Van Nara. And that means that was later, from what I read, was later the same word was attributed to apes and monkeys, but apparently they have other names for apes and monkeys. So when they say Vanara, it really means the forest people. Uh,
Forest people, where in your journey did Sasquatch, Yeti, this interest, this spiritual connection start for you and their message to humanity?
right. Well, it's a long story, but I can try to summarize. I mean, when I was pre-teen, I started reading other outside of my religious education, learning namely about ancient hidden archaeology, like advanced technologies we find in many ancient sites around the world, cyclopean architecture with blocks we can't even move nowadays that are perfectly fit and adjusted, and all those enigmas that make basically life so interesting. Uh, Give us a bigger picture of what we learn in the school manuals. So I went on a quest. I left when I was 16, and I started going around temples and ashrams and churches and tribes to find teachings and answers. And seek and you shall find. And I found a lot of knowledge from different sources and started studying. And eventually I found closer uh, connections, I can say, with indigenous ancestral teachings, tribal spirituality, because it's the oldest form of spiritual knowledge and practice that humanity has known. So it goes way back to the origin, and that's why many indigenous cultures talk about, well, like you can find in the Vedas, they talk about aerial chariots and
That's right. That's
wars,
right.
wars in the skies and the other planets that are inhabited. So that ancient knowledge is basically what we have to remember. Modern society has lost a lot of it, and very often intentionally has
That's
been
right.
concealing our distant past so we can be easier to control the modern paradigm. So to answer your question, I'm going off here, but I started on my journey before I turned 17, and I became a seeker and went around looking for knowledge, and I had guidance to do my first vision quest, which is in traditions of shamanic cultures. It's pretty much the beginning of a shamanic practice. Is to go out in the wilderness most often, fast and pray to get a vision and meet some spirit guides. And that's how it started for me when I was 17 in 81. And that same week, Sasquatch. I had my first close encounter with a Sasquatch.
We have to hear that story on your vision quest.
Right. Well, the Vision Quest was actually a few days after the close encounter with the Sasquatch at the same place, which is Chehalis, by Chehalis Reserve, which uh, near the Fraser Valley, from where the name Sasquatch comes from their dialect. And they have also the Sasquatch as their tribal emblem there, and it's a very it's called the next town is called the Sasquatch capital of the world. So it's very present there because there's still ongoing encounters and it's still present in their culture. They honor them in ceremonies. So that's why, without knowing any of that, that's where my first encounter happened. And Sasquatch came in the night and put down our camp and vanished. And we at that point we are a bunch of young men. We had no understanding or couldn't even relate the phenomenon with Sasquatch. It was too far out of this world. But the story goes on that I kept searching and searching. I kept having encounters. At first, they were sporadic, once every few years, maybe. I would have some kind of an encounter with Sasquatch. Meanwhile, I also had several encounters with star beings, spaceships, and humanoids that were part of my training. And it took, I often say, because some people might expect to have quick results. But I often say that for me, it took 33 years of shamanic training with multiple elders, various places, various nations, to learn to deal with the spirit world and the paranormal and to understand how things work, how the universe is made, and our psychic abilities. And with all this training, after 33 years, they started coming around to call me out. I had other clear encounters in between, but that then in 2014 it became intensive. Where I was researching on them, I wanted to find who they were, and they started coming where I was living, manifesting one way or another, walking on my roof, looking at me through the windows, and it went on for a year. And I moved during that year, and it kept happening. So I realized it was not a local phenomenon. It was consciousness is not a local phenomenon, and it can, with interdimensional abilities, it can manifest anywhere, regardless of linear space and time limitations.
Okay, so I just want to take a little pause here. You said so much, and I really want to sort of go back. So your first experience, you said you were with a group of, yeah, you were young at that time. This was at a camping, and it just like out of nowhere that the Sasquatch had appeared. Like, was it for a couple of minutes? Was it a second? Were they moving?
Yeah, well, that's a story I've told often, so I tend to summarize because
Oh, okay.
anymore. But what happened is, in the middle of the night, it was pouring rain. It was a dark, pitch black night, and we heard heavy footfalls coming through the bush along the river. And before we knew, oh, well, we all commented, 10 of us commented that we heard someone speaking into our heads.
Really? So, wow.
Some
Like,
said into our dreams. And that we all heard that same, we could not put in words, but we could hear very clearly someone who was admonishing us for not respecting the land because we had stripped a couple small cedars to make our roof. We were, 10 young guys coming out of the city with no respect of nature. So that was a lesson. And so there was a guy camped in a little tent next to our lean-to, and he came out panic after the roof fell on our face. We woke up, we wondered what was happening, and he said he saw a big hairy monster come and put down the camp, and then vanish like a ghost. So we didn't believe him, and we couldn't make. We couldn't understand anything. What happened? It remained a mystery for years after that because we couldn't relate it to Sasquatch. Once the the switch was made in my mind, and it's, oh, that was Sasquatch. That's very clear now. Everything comes clear. That happens a lot to several experiencers who, when they start knowing Sasquatch, they often remember they had previous experiences without being aware of it. Some with from childhood, actually.
Wow. Um, you had mentioned earlier that Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Yeti, they're very peaceful. A lot of wisdom. They like to be left alone. So in this case, it's not that they weren't peaceful, it's just like you sort of crossed the line at that age with your friends. You're not respecting nature, correct?
Yeah. Well, they are actually their mission is that they're caretakers of nature,
That's right.
carekeepers.
I've heard that. Yes.
So their job is to protect nature. So if you go with respect and love of nature in your heart, they see that and they say, well, that person's all right. If you go, you want to clear cut the forest, or you want to dam the river, or you want to mine, blow up dynamite in their backyard, they certainly will not appreciate it, and they might interfere. And you hear many stories of, especially around logging parties or sometimes hunting parties, where they get frightened away. They hear screams.
Really?
Yeah, they hear wood knocks, or they have logs or rocks thrown at them. But actually, in all those cases, you realize that the projectiles are thrown near them as a warning to frighten them, but not at them to hurt them. So that shows even in that situation, when the Sasquatch wants to chase people, it will rather frighten them than hurt them. You know.
Have you heard of stories, Sunbow, where they have hurt people, where people are, oh, yes, it attacked me? Have you heard of stories like that?
Yeah. Well,
Really?
there's plenty actually. We have to be careful with every story we hear. In my encyclopedia of all things Sasquatch,
Yes.
hairy humanoids from the wild, there's a couple chapters consecrated to alleged attacks. And we notice, but when we study all those cases, there can be hundreds, that most often, in general, there were more fear than harm. Many people, they just like, they will
Mm,
see a Sasquatch walk by, or they will hear a scream, or they will call that an attack because they're just afraid.
right.
There are cases of attacks that are well documented, and you realize in most, if not all, those cases, the Sasquatch were defending themselves. It was legitimate defense. They were being shot at. If you take the most famous case of the Boggy Creek monster, for instance, they made movies and books and
Sorry, which
festival.
one was this? Which one?
The Bogey Creek monster.
Oh,
Since the 70s, there were movies made about that, and it's still a big bestseller.
really? I
Uh,
never heard of it. Okay.
so it was in Arkansas, I guess, or Oklahoma somewhere.
Okay.
And the story goes that there was a Sasquatch walking around and tried to look into the camp, and they freaked out. They took a gun, started shooting at the Sasquatch. They went out on the porch, and the Sasquatch got a little mad and threw a guy on the floor. and ran into the woods, and they put up posses and hunting parties trying to kill that Sasquatch for days. And it turns out that it's a big scary story that's being selling, told and retold in all different.
Is this the one? Like I know, I was watching on YouTube or maybe it was on Prime TV or something. Like there's some national parks, stories of national parks. It's like a documentary where they go and look at the secrets of national parks. And I remember one episode that I was watching. It was somewhere in the U.S. where a bunch of these, like two guys. I don't know if it's the same story, but they see something in the forest, the red eyes or something, and they try to run after it. So I don't know if it's that one, but like you
It's one
said,
of
there's
yeah, it's not the same one, but it's one of
okay,
those many stories we hear. If you take just to conclude on that Boogie Creek monster, which is also called the folk monster.
okay,
If you look at the study, the case, and they had over 250 sightings in that area in a century, let's say. All right, that's only the reports because the reports only represent a tiny bit, tip of the iceberg of all the sightings because most people won't report or they don't find where to report. So let's say 250 peaceful encounters. And there's this one incident when they start shooting at the Sasquatch and he threw a guy on the floor and the guy had a couple scratches. And that turns into a big horror movie and a big bestseller scare story. So that shows, that summarizes pretty much a lot of the Bigfoot movement is that if you talk about the 250 peaceful encounters, you don't get an audience. But if you talk about the one attack, so-called attack,
right.
then you're gonna sell big because that's what people want to hear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally makes sense. I'm going to rewind a little bit. You said, you know, there's people of power, KGB, M16. They know that Sasquatch exists. What is their, are they, from your research, are they doing research themselves? Are they trying to connect or have they already connected? Do you know?
Definitely. Well, before even those agencies existed, you look. There's been a cover up. Even in the 1800s, there's multiple stories where they ended up capturing or killing a Sasquatch, most often a young one, and then they disappear. They're shipped somewhere to some university. We never hear about them anymore. There's several cases like that. Then in the 1950s, there's several documented cases of sustained research on hairy humanoids or other cryptids, actually, that were conducted directly by, for instance, Tom Slick of the CIA. For several years, he was in the Himalaya with Peter Byrne. They stole a Yeti hand from a Tibetan monastery. And there's the infamous Yeti memo of the U.S. Embassy in Nepal from 1959, an official U.S. government document stating the conditions for Yeti hunting. That if
Oh,
you,
wow.
yeah, it says if you find any evidence, DNA sample, photos, corpse, anything, you have to keep it secret and only disclose to the government. That's 1959. That's all. No, it doesn't prove not only that the government was aware of the research, but was controlling it. And from there, we can go. The same Tom Slick came in 1960 to Bluff Creek, California. If people familiar with the Sasquatch world all know that name, where the famous Patterson Gimlin footage came from 7 years later. That same camp in Bluff Creek, California, where many of the great names of Sasquatchery, I call, were since years before that famous or infamous footage came out. So that shows that there were also, just to conclude, in 1962, there was the International Committee of Research on Hairy Humanoids based in Rome that involved people from several countries, over 30 people, including Tom Slick and CIA agent, people from the MI6, people from the KGB, or related closely or remotely to those agencies, people from China, people from France, and those 30 or so became all the most famous name in cryptozoology or Bigfoot research.
Wow. It's just like my eyes are just being opened right now. Like there's so much. And that's the reason why I love doing this podcast, because I become the student, SunBôw, and I learn from guests like you. And I just find it very fascinating. From watching TV shows or on YouTube, I'm actually speaking to someone who's written 3 books in this area, and I'm sort of like a little kid at a candy store. It's like, I want to know more. I want to know more. And one of the things you had mentioned is that in your own journey, years later, like you had mentioned, 33 years in the making, for a period of time, it became a frequent phenomenon where you would be in contact with the Sasquatch. Like you said, they would be or you would see them in the window, or they're walking on the roof. What
Yeah.
at that time for you? Did you feel like, okay, my years of spiritual journey, where I am today, where I can connect with these interdimensional beings, like you felt like I finally made it almost?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, it took me 33 years before I was finally ready to go and meet them and openly communicate. 33 years of training into spiritual matters and shamanic phenomena. It's been 10 years since. That's when, before that, I had sporadic encounters here and there without understanding too much about them. When I went, I said, okay, I want to know what's going on and understand who you are. And I went and met them, and then it became regular. It became, especially at for a time, they asked me to write the Sasquatch Message to Humanity, channeled messages, which became a trilogy. I had no idea it was going to be a book to start with. And they just told me, well, share what knowledge we're teaching you. And it had a international resonance. And this first book is now translated in 7 languages. It's being launched in Japanese right now in Japan. And there's been incredible feedback. So that was a mission they asked me to fulfill, and we did it together. And it's a bit of a, like I say, they upgraded me because I had learned a lot in my training, but they brought me to another level of interdimensionality and understanding the fabrics of the universe and how we can interact and apply this knowledge to, for instance, healing practices or spiritual work.
Sunbao, the world is going through a huge shift right now.
Yeah.
And people are waking up. People are looking for solutions. People are looking for alternative healing. They're connecting with nature. The medical system has its place. If you break a bone, you go to the hospital, they'll repair it. But people are looking for other healing modalities, way to heal the body, the mind, the spirit. And here we are talking about messages from Sasquatch to humanity. And I will ask you after, like, what's one of the messages? And I'm sure there are many. But just before we get there, like, this is like a funny question. It's like, it seems like you became one with them. It's like, yo, SunBôw, you're part of a family now. Like, how are you? Like, did you feel like a bond with this? And was it a family of Sasquatches, or was it just one being? It's like you knew them, like it was just playful, like kids playing together. Like, what was that like? The dynamic?
Yeah, well, we have to understand the Sasquatch and highly evolved spiritual beings like them, like the some star elders.
Oh
They
yes, that's right.
they have the very high psychic abilities, and telepathy is the universal language.
Hmm.
They can talk when they meet from different planets. They have different languages, but they all communicate through telepathy, so they all can understand each other and be on the same level. Um, that's one thing that is pretty much necessary to develop, to learn, uh, uh, to develop our telepathic abilities, because it's a natural instinct. Animals have it, we all have it. We just have to be aware and practice it. I often tell people practice with your animals around you, the birds, animal, any animal. Send them your good thoughts, your living thoughts, and you will see them answer. Uh, if it works with animals, it works with people. It works with, and then there's no limitation, space-time limitation for the consciousness to travel. So it can be instant anywhere in the universe. So when we have this understanding and we start interacting with beings like Sasquatch, it's up to us how far we want to take it, because there's no limits, basically.
You've answered my question. Telepathy is the key, and it goes. As children, we're so innocent, we're wide open, and then we go through this system, and layer by layer, year after year, the uniqueness of who we are gets stripped away, and then we get molded. And it's a reminder that we need to go back and connect with nature, be with nature, live with nature. And when one is one with nature and they feel it's the right path, communication. You connect with your surrounding, and this is what I'm hearing that you are saying. And in the opening, you had also mentioned, and then you also shared that you've also connected with other interdimensional beings. Was this with the support of the Sasquatch? Like they were guides there for you?
Yes, exactly. Most often, even if sometimes unconsciously, it's all there's no coincidence. It's all a process of learning, and we have guidance if we just open to it. The telepathy is one way. There can be signs that are given to us, synchronicities, and teachings that show us the way. And what one of the things the Sasquatch are teaching is especially to develop our telepathy, not only with them, but with for the animals, for instance, or the star beings. Once you've developed this process, and you get answer, you see the signs, you see it's real. Like I say, start with animals because you can verify. But when you see this working, you can. There's no limit with how far you can practice it. And star beings, just like the Sasquatch, because they are star beings. Actually, they are part of the
Oh, is that
council.
right? Oh.
Yeah, they are part of the council of star elders. They have been put here as caretakers long before humanity, modern humans. But the thing is, they have kept their psychic ability that modern humans have lost due to ages of indoctrination and slavery, we can say. So they help us to remember what is our true potential, our true essence, that we are not physical beings, we are multi dimensional beings. and that we can reconnect through this knowledge to our greater cosmic family. Like you asked earlier, did I feel like a family with them? I sure did,
Right.
because they are connected among themselves. So if you meet one, they all know it. They all know you after that.
You know, the last 4 years, I always take a trip to. I live here in Mississauga, Ontario, and then every year for the last 4 years, I've been taking a trip to Alberta and British Columbia.
Mhm.
And SunBôw, there's always that thought in my head. I send out, I'm like, okay, Sasquatch, I'm here. I would love to connect with you. And like you said, it's not like something you go out and happens. This is something where there has to be like a practice almost, like a genuine connection of wanting to connect. Am I right? Like I can't just make a trip tomorrow and say, okay, Sasquatch, Yeti, I'm here, I'm spiritual. Please connect with me.
Yeah, it's a long term process, and it shows. I mean, the more effort and sincerity you put in it, the more chances you have to get results. Another thing I must say, you don't have to go to BC or Alberta, because there's hundreds, if not thousands, of reports uh, all over North America, in every state, every province. Um,
Even
there,
Ontario, is that right?
oh, plenty, yeah. There's they
Really?
have different names there. They have they're called by uh, uh, Kichisabe or Sabe or
Oh,
Janosqua. They have different names there, and there's very some known hotspots in Ontario. The one in Algonquin Park, actually, where I had probably some of my first communications with Sasquatch in the 80s and late 80s and early 90s, was in Algonquin Park. And but far deep in the wilderness, and with a lot of efforts put in it. I did vision quest for 10 days and stuff like that, fasting. So when you do such efforts, or another way is to make a gifting area. If you if you see, for instance, signs of them or not, you can just consecrate a spot to offer offerings and gifts, and try to establish communication. And it's a long term process too. It doesn't mean it's going to happen instantly, but maybe next month or next year, if you keep at it, they will see how sincere you are, and they choose who they want to talk to. We can't blame them for that. I think it's wise.
that's right. You
So
know,
yeah,
when I, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, this, when I went to Nelson, BC, and I was in the office talking about, I'm here. I would love to see a Sasquatch, and then some lady came out. I was like, yeah, I've been told that you can leave an apple outside, and they like apples. And she came out, this lady. She goes, no, 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 no. She goes, they love cucumbers. So, can you shed some light? Like, I think what you said, like, if you can reserve a space for offering, is there certain foods they like? Like I like butter chicken. If you give me butter chicken, I'm gonna eat it, or chili chicken. What about they? Do they have a favorite food where it's like their guilty food? Like people like chips and cookies and ice cream. Do they have guilty foods?
Well, we have to understand they are all individuals too. They have different, even cultures among themselves, different tribes and lineages. So they don't all have the same, tastes. Or also, what I often tell, because people often ask what to offer, or how, and I wrote a lot about that. Is that basically ima- visualize you're going to meet an elder who has things to teach you. What would you bring them? If you bring them an apple, they will really be happy. If you bring them, but they don't need. If you bring them junk food, maybe less. But some people say they like cantaloupes or this and that. That probably works at some place at some time. What I say is that they don't need us to feed them. They need it's just a sign of friendship and respect. And offerings don't have to be food. And most often, well, native often offer a pinch of tobacco, or it's the intention you put in that is the most important. The prayer, the if you express clearly your intention that you honor them and you want to connect, or that's what makes the difference. And there's even ta- places that if you're in the middle of the desert, you have nothing to offer, you can take a pebble or a pinch of soil and put your prayer in it and offer it, and that works as fine as any gift from the store. Actually, they don't care so much about gifts from the store. It's more the intention we put in it. A piece of craft, a crystal, a feather, anything that I often give some of my hair to, as they would. They have done that for me as well. So I
So, do
think,
you have samples of hair of Sasquatch?
yeah,
You
I have
know,
a
there's a lot of people out there on YouTube world. There's all these videos that, like, you had mentioned earlier, they take their cameras, infrared cameras, and their documentary, and then at the end they're like, "Oh, we tried, but we couldn't find anything." But here you are, where you have actually a piece of hair. Like, have you uh, given it to any associates of yours to do like DNA, like the origins or anything like that?
No, I have several samples. The one, the biggest one, was given to me by my main guide, Camus, whom I channeled in the Sasquatch Message to Humanity trilogy. It was the day of the launch of the first book. I mean, the event which was the first psychic Sasquatch spiritual retreat we had in Chihuahua, Washington, in 2016. And the day before I was going to do the opening ceremony at that very spot, I came there with a friend, and there was a very nice big piece of hair, half braided and half twisted like a dread, if you want, or a jetta. And that piece of hair, the special one, was given as a clear sign that I was going to do my first public Sasquatch presentation, launching my book and doing the opening ceremony there. So that was a clear sign to say we're with you. And I shared this particular sample with probably 15 or 20 people from different continents, including Dr. Igor, a friend from Institute of Armenology of Moscow, who's well renowned, 70 years of practice in the field. So, but if you want to have the question everybody has, have you done DNA testing? I said no, and I don't care about DNA testing. I've had 7 or 8 samples given to me by them or other experiencers, and I have nothing to prove. And I certainly am not looking for fame or fortune or even too much attention. To be honest, I try to bring attention and focus on spiritual teachings and not
That's
on
right.
the personal person. I'm not here to get fans or likes or stuff like that, because I have a lot of opinions that are not popular at all,
Right.
uh, and I still keep them.
And that's fine, absolutely. And then definitely we appreciate that you've taken the time to sort of be here. I mean, we can go on for another 2, 3 hours here. As we sort of wrap up here, Sunbow, the time has gone by so quickly here. What's one of the messages from the messages to humanity? And I think you made one clear, which is telepathy, connecting with nature. Is there another one that you would like to share?
Yeah, well, the essence of it all is to remember who we are, our interdimensional, multi-dimensional nature with different bodies, different aspects of our existence, and that of the universe we live in, so we can connect with all the different dimensions and interact, and to be, because we are caretakers, we're put here, we're created on this planet to take care of it, to help it flourish, to develop, protect biodiversity, and let help life to thrive. So that's the basics of it. Of course, they go into deep details of all the history of our planet, its place in the universe, the other species that have been here, that have been coming here, how they influence the history, then also all the fabrics of the universe with the different dimensions, how they interact, and all these details that we to further and deepen our practice and our understanding. But the basis of it all is to be good caretakers, and to leave good tracks for the future generations.
Which makes total sense. Every time you share their message of humanity, SunBôw, I don't know if anybody's asked you this question. Every time you share the message, like here you are on this podcast sharing this message, because they're so wise and they're interdimensional, they see, hear everything. They must be aware of you communicating with me and then to the listeners as well too. And they must get a sense of pride. Look, the work is being done. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, definitely, because what has been the most amazing outcome of all this in the last 8, 10 years, let's say, is to see how these things we're talking about now were totally outcast, almost pretty much the margin of the margin, and the woo woo clan, and all that stuff that was pretty much, even in the Bigfoot world, ostracized. But the last 10 years, I've seen that it's becoming mainstream, because that's where the answers are. That's where there's more and more people, even among many of the conventional researchers have seen, that start to open up to the spiritual aspects of the phenomenon, the paranormal and the psychic parts of it that explain the whole story.
It sure does. It sure does. Hopefully, I got some bonus points with some of the elder wise Sasquatch, and next time I'm somewhere in the forest, I'm like, hey, remember me? I sort of connected with SunBôw. You have connections with him. I'm your side. I'm here to connect and receive a divine hand and friendship. So that'd be amazing.
Yeah,
That'd be
well, I can
amazing.
say one thing is that I've assisted over 100 people by now in having their first contact with Sasquatch, and
Oh, do you have like
oh
retreats
yeah,
and all that? Oh, okay,
oh
okay. Can we
yeah,
just end off on that? Can you just talk about that and we'll end it off there? We got to bring you back again, Sunbao, in the future. But can you just talk about these retreats, or like you said, you have had allowed 100 people to encounter?
yeah. Well, with first through reading my books, I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of people writing to me saying they had some kind of a first contact when reading my books, because it explains who they are and how to connect with them. So some people sit and let they hear a knock, or would tree, or whatever sign, a vision, a dream. Then on the grounds, there's been several occasions where I introduce people to Sasquatch, where just hearing them or knowing they're around, seeing footprints, tree structures they build. So very often I introduce people to meet Sasquatch, to recognize their presence. And in some cases, there were multiple witnesses to certain encounters, especially in like retreats or special occasions, ceremonies, for instance, where they will tend to manifest more clearly. And if there's 2, 3, 10 people there who are open and willing in that same, uh, because I've seen that happen in native ceremonies as well, where those spirits manifest, if there's enough people there open and ready for it.
This conversation definitely needs to continue. I think this is just part one, Sunbao. I think there's a lot of interest in this world. With all the mainstream Hollywood movies, we're hearing a complete different, image of Sasquatch, Yeti, Bigfoot. I honestly feel they're special beings. Like you said, they're the caretakers of the forest. Many of the world religions, share stories of them as well too, from China to India to Europe to South America. There is a rise of the desire of wanting to learn more about the messages. So this is just part one, Sunbao. We're going to come and invite you again and sort of continue on this conversation. I think this is a good place where we should just end it.
All
And
right.
I really want to thank you for taking the time out and really sharing this, Sunbao. You've definitely opened my eyes and the curiosity. And just for the listeners, I'm definitely going to add where you can connect with Sunbao, and I'll add that to the show notes. So, Sunbao, thank you for taking the time out. We really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.